My parents abandoned me in the scorching desert while I was 6 months pregnant. Take a nice walk and relax. My sister laughed as the car sped off, leaving me behind. It'll be good exercise. Her voice faded into the wind. But hours later, when they turned on the TV, they were left speechless. My parents abandoned me in the scorching desert while I was 6 months pregnant. Take a nice walk and relax. My sister laughed as the car sped away, leaving me behind. It's good exercise, I said, though her voice faded into the wind. Hours later, when they turned on the TV, they were left speechless. The Arizona heat clung to the skin like a living thing. In my air-conditioned office, I felt a gentle flutter in my belly. Good morning, little one, I whispered, stroking my stomach. At 6 months, my body had already changed a lot. On my desk at the accounting firm, work documents lay beside the latest ultrasound image, the first glimpse of our baby with Greg. I remembered how we both cried when we saw those tiny limbs moving. Every night, Greg would put his hand on my belly and talk sweetly to our unborn child. Melissa, how's the Lyman family paperwork coming along? My boss Michael called out. I'm just doing the final check. It should be ready in about 30 minutes. As I returned to my work, I couldn't help but think about dinner that evening with my parents. It wasn't just another family dinner, it was always a little ordeal. My parents, Robert and Charlotte Johnson, were real estate tycoons known throughout the Phoenix suburbs. Outwardly, they looked like the perfect family, but underneath lay complicated truths. Things had gotten even messier since my sister Vanessa divorced and moved back home. Vanessa had always been the favorite, living a life completely opposite to mine. While I worked hard studying accounting and building my career, Vanessa dropped out of art school and thrived in glamorous parties. Her brief, extravagant marriage to a real estate heir ended after just 2 years. That girl is too emotional, Mom would say. She has talent but is always misunderstood. I usually kept quiet about it. Then my cell phone rang with Mom on the screen. Melissa, dinner tonight has been moved to 7. Vanessa's yoga class is running late, but Mom, Greg and I adjusted our schedules for you. You've always been flexible. I thought, isn't Greg busy as always? I took a deep breath and replied, fine, we'll be there at 7. I'll try to let Greg know, then hung up. I leaned back in my chair exhausted. It was always like this. While I was expected to be the responsible one, Vanessa's whims ruled our family plans. That evening, I parked in front of the Johnson mansion. Greg couldn't cancel his meeting with an important client. I'm sorry, honey, but today I have to be strong for both of us, I murmured to my baby as I opened the door. Inside, Vanessa's lively laughter filled the room. I saw her lounging on the sofa with her legs stretched out, laughing with our father. Oh, Melissa, you finally made it. Mom greeted with a wine glass in hand. My, you've really filled out, haven't you? I managed a small smile. That's because I'm pregnant, Mom. Did you get that outfit from a maternity store? Vanessa teased with a grimace. There are much more stylish options. I chose it for functionality. I can wear it to the office, I replied. Well, appearance matters too, Mom interjected. Robert, bring Melissa something to drink. At 65, Dad still carried a dignified air. A man who once intimidated rivals in countless real estate deals. Busy as always, I accepted the non-alcoholic drink he handed me. It's quarterly closing time. Always work, 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 he joked. Vanessa rolled her eyes. Once the baby's born, you won't be working so much. Are you worried about that? She asked quietly. For a moment, the room fell silent before Mom quickly changed the subject. Hey, why don't we have a picnic near the Grand Canyon this weekend? The weather should be nice, and it'd be a nice change for you, Melissa. That sounds wonderful, Vanessa said, leaning forward excitedly. I even bought a new drone so we can take amazing scenic photos. Greg has to work this weekend, I began, but Dad interrupted. Greg is always working. You should tell him to value family time a bit more. I wanted to object, but the dinner bell rang, interrupting the conversation. During the meal, we talked about baby names and nursery plans. On the surface, it was a pleasant dinner, but I couldn't shake the feeling of Vanessa's judging gaze. Melissa, I'm thinking of having the Grand Canyon picnic on Saturday. Does that work for you? Mom asked again. Faced with expectant looks from Mom and Dad and Vanessa's challenging stare, I simply nodded. Yes, that's fine. I'll join you. As I left the room, Vanessa stared at my belly and said, now that you're pregnant, all our parents' attention is on you, isn't it? Vanessa, this isn't a competition, I replied softly, though she only smirked. Saturday morning came with mixed feelings. Greg had already left, leaving a note on my pillow. I'll come pick you up if work finishes early. Take care, love you. I clutched the note to my chest and took a deep breath. It's going to be okay, I murmured to my baby. Just a family trip, it'll be over soon. An hour before the scheduled pickup, Dad's luxury SUV pulled up outside my apartment. From the driver's seat, Dad waved and Vanessa waved from the back. Mom stepped out and embraced me. Today's going to be a lovely day, Charlotte said with a smile, though her eyes hinted at other thoughts. In the car, Vanessa chatted excitedly about her new designer sunglasses and drone while I watched the Arizona wilderness unfold through the window. As we left the city behind, the landscape grew drier, with browns and reds dominating the view. Dad, where are we going? We're still far from the Grand Canyon, right? I asked. Yes, but there's a spot along the way with incredible views, Dad replied through the rearview mirror. A secret place I learned about from a tour guide friend. I began to feel uneasy. Come on, Vanessa, you never have any sense of adventure, I muttered. Everything always has to go exactly as planned, Vanessa shot back. I'm pregnant, Vanessa, I quietly retorted. Some worry is natural. Soon the car left the paved road and turned onto a gravel path. Red rock mountains loomed in the distance, dry shrubs scattered about. It was a deserted spot with no sign of tourists. Are you sure this is right? I asked, unable to hide my concern. You worry too much, Mom said confidently. Robert knows the way. After about 20 minutes, the SUV suddenly stopped. There was nothing around except the vast, empty desert. Here we are, Dad announced excitedly. The view from here is spectacular. We all got out, and I felt the fierce June sun beating down. I pulled my hat down and reapplied sunscreen. Look, if we climb that hill over there, we'll get an even better view, Mom suggested, pointing to a hill at least 500 meters away. We're really walking that far? I asked, surprised. I'm a bit tired and it's so hot, I complained. Here we go again. Vanessa rolled her eyes, always quick to grumble. A little walking won't hurt the baby, she added. I was about to protest but swallowed my words when I saw the expectant faces of my parents. Fine, but I'm taking water with me, I said, pulling out a bottle. We started walking. I moved at a slow pace, occasionally stopping to rest, while Mom, Dad, and Vanessa continued ahead, whispering among themselves. When we reached the middle of the hill, Dad suddenly stopped. Oh, I forgot the camera in the car, he exclaimed, slapping his forehead. Charlotte, let's go back and get it. I'll come too. Vanessa quickly said. No, you stay with Melissa, as Mom instructed. We'll be right back. I watched as they hurried back down the hill. Vanessa then sat on a rock, looking annoyed as she stared at her smartphone. They said they'd be right back, I thought, noticing that more than 20 minutes had passed. Vanessa, can you call Dad? I asked, but she replied indifferently. No signal. Besides, I need to use the bathroom. I'm going back to the car. Wait, let's go together. But before I knew it, Vanessa had already started walking. Sighing, I slowly followed, my knees aching in the silent desert. Then I heard an engine roaring. I stopped and listened. The sound grew louder. Hurriedly, I climbed the hill for a better view, and my heart froze. I saw our family SUV driving away in a cloud of dust. What are you doing? I shouted, beginning to descend quickly, but my pregnant body couldn't keep pace. Fear and disbelief surged through me as I pulled out my phone, only to see no service mocking me. The car kept moving until, in the final moment, the passenger window rolled down and Vanessa's face appeared. Her voice carried on the wind. Enjoy a relaxing walk. I stood frozen in despair. Her final words echoed as the car shrank to a dot and eventually vanished beyond the horizon. I collapsed to my knees on the scorching sand, whispering in a trembling voice. This must be a bad joke. They'll come back soon. But as an hour passed, then no car appeared. The sun blazed overhead and my water bottle was half empty. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I murmured, Don't panic, think. I looked around. Even the nearest road seemed miles away. Walking back to civilization was too dangerous, especially while pregnant. I'll have to wait for help, I decided, even though I knew rescue in such a deserted place wasn't likely. Still, for the sake of my baby and myself, I clung to hope. Late in the afternoon, a miracle appeared on the horizon. I spotted two figures in hiking gear moving toward me. Summoning every bit of strength left, I stood up and waved, shouting, Help, over here. The young couple noticed me and hurried over, a welcome sign of rescue in the vast desert. Their faces filled with shock and concern. Are you okay? The woman asked, staring at Melissa, a pregnant woman alone in the middle of nowhere. I was left behind. Melissa choked on her words as tears streamed down her cheeks. Before she could say more, the man quickly unzipped his backpack and pressed a bottle of water into her trembling hands. Drink this first, then we'll call the police. There's no cell service out here, but don't worry, we have a satellite phone. We always come prepared, he explained firmly. After hearing Melissa's story, the rescuer's anger was palpable. The man pulled out his phone and began recording the barren area around her. Let's keep this as evidence, he whispered. People who commit such unforgivable acts must be held accountable. With the couple's help, Melissa slowly rose. Tears of gratitude mixed with disbelief as she was lifted into a waiting rescue helicopter. A paramedic quickly fitted an oxygen mask over her dry, sunburned lips. Amid the helicopter's rumbling vibrations, she managed a grateful look toward the couple, Adam and Jessica, who had come to her aid. Are you all right? Jessica asked, her voice full of worry. Melissa nodded weakly. The paramedic offered a reassuring smile. Her fetal heartbeat is stable, and dehydration hasn't worsened too much. We're getting you to the hospital for a full examination immediately. My husband, Melissa tried to speak, but Adam interrupted. We've already contacted him. The police were notified as soon as we called. The helicopter soon landed on the rooftop of a general hospital in a Phoenix suburb. A medical team rushed out, and Melissa was gently transferred onto a stretcher. As she was wheeled down a corridor, she noticed a familiar silhouette rushing toward her at the far end. Her husband's voice, filled with fear, relief, and anger, echoed down the hall. "Greg." She clutched his hand tightly as he demanded, "Are you okay? What about the baby?" Fighting back tears, Greg listened as the doctor explained, "Your wife has significant heat exhaustion and dehydration, but her life isn't in danger. We'll begin tests in a few minutes." Greg's grip tightened as he absorbed every word. "The police called me. I can't believe your parents did this," he murmured, voice shaking. Melissa's tired eyes met his. "They left me behind," she said softly. Outside the examination room, Vanessa's laughter could be heard, a cruel reminder of their twisted family dynamics. Just then, 2 police officers approached the bed. "Mrs. Williams, we'd like to speak with you as soon as you're able," one officer said gently. "A short interview if you're up for it." About 10 minutes later, a female officer smiled kindly as she opened her notebook. "Let me confirm the details. Today, you headed toward the Grand Canyon with your parents and sister, correct?" Melissa nodded weakly and recounted the events. As she spoke, Greg's face hardened with anger. "We have evidence," the other officer interjected, showing a video clip provided by Adam and Jessica. It clearly recorded the moment Melissa was abandoned, the car speeding away, and even voices from inside the vehicle could be heard. "We've also noted the license plate number," the officer added. "An APB has been issued, and officers are on their way to your parents' residence." At that moment, the hospital room door swung open, and a well-dressed woman with a small microphone stepped in. "Carol Simons from Channel 12 News," she announced. "Melissa, regarding this tragic incident, please step aside. Get out. This is a hospital room." Greg roared, and the police officers escorted the reporter out. The doctor sighed. "I'm sorry, but it appears news of this incident leaked. They likely intercepted our emergency radio." Meanwhile, in the hallway, Greg pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number. "Jason, it's Greg. I need legal advice immediately. This is an emergency. Melissa's parents and sister are involved," he said in a lowered voice. Outside the hospital, media had already gathered. The story of a pregnant woman abandoned in the desert by her own family had instantly become top local news. At the Johnson mansion, Robert, Charlotte, and Vanessa were together in the living room, trying to return to normal after the incident. "Any word from Melissa?" Robert asked anxiously. "Not yet," Charlotte replied, flipping through a magazine. "I'm sure Greg went to pick her up. How could she even get a signal out there?" Vanessa laughed derisively. "Maybe the joke went too far," Robert muttered, gazing out the window. "Dad, you worry too much. Melissa always finds a way. There are tourists around, someone will come by soon," Vanessa said. "Always trying to get our attention, isn't she? We just needed to teach her a reality check," Charlotte added. Robert finally relaxed a bit. "Sometimes tough love is necessary," he said in a trembling voice. Vanessa, sprawled on the sofa with a TV remote, casually switched channels until a local news report began. For a few seconds, the three watched with mild interest until the screen froze on a headline. "Breaking news. Pregnant woman abandoned in the desert by her family." The announcer's voice boomed. "We repeat. A pregnant woman has been abandoned in the desert on the outskirts of Phoenix." Footage showed Melissa being carried out of the rescue helicopter on a stretcher, alongside images of her alone in the desert and a shot of Vanessa leaning out of the car window as if to taunt her. The reporter's voice continued. "Enjoy a relaxing walk, it's good exercise." While the license plate was clearly visible. Police are tracking the suspects and have already identified them. This cruel act is likely to face serious criminal charges. Silence fell over the room as the three stared at one another, speechless. "It was meant to be a joke," Robert whispered shakily. "Just a lesson for Melissa." "That's a lie," Vanessa suddenly shouted. "This was all Dad and Mom's plan. I didn't know anything." Charlotte's voice turned ice cold. It was a joke Melissa was supposed to understand. At that moment, the doorbell rang loudly. The three froze, unable to move. The bell rang again, longer and more forcefully. Slowly, Robert rose on unsteady legs and walked to the door. When he opened it, 2 police officers stood there. "Are you Robert Johnson?" one asked sternly. "Yes," he replied. "Are Charlotte Johnson and Vanessa Johnson here as well?" "Yes, they are," Robert answered. "Then we need all of you to come with us to the station for questioning regarding the assault and abandonment of Melissa Williams," the officer declared. Before Robert could protest, Vanessa's voice piped up from behind. "It's all Dad and Mom's fault, they planned it. I didn't know anything." The officers fixed her with cold stares. "We'll discuss this at the station," one said curtly. Outside, red and blue police lights flashed as curious neighbors gathered. A TV van arrived, its cameras trained on the house. As the three were led into a police car, Charlotte covered her face in shame, while Vanessa's eyes betrayed a disturbing lack of remorse, as if the whole incident were nothing more than a trivial prank. I never thought it would come to this, she muttered under her breath. In the sterile interrogation room at the Phoenix police station, Robert sat alone at a metal table. Once dignified, he now looked like a broken man, shoulders slumped. Mr. Johnson, I'll ask again, Detective Parker said calmly. Why did you abandon your pregnant daughter in the desert? It was meant to be a joke, a lesson for Melissa, Robert mumbled, unable to meet the detective's gaze. What kind of lesson did your pregnant daughter need? Detective Parker's voice dripped with incredulity. Robert's words stumbled as sweat beaded on his forehead. She always only thinks about herself, especially now that she's pregnant. Detective Parker scribbled notes. So, whose idea was this joke? Robert fell silent. In another interrogation room, Charlotte sat across from Detective Morris. To be honest, it was Vanessa's idea, she admitted in a trembling voice. Since our daughter became pregnant, Vanessa has been harboring resentment. My husband and I agreed to her suggestion out of jealousy. Detective Morris asked coolly. You weren't serious? Charlotte's eyes welled with tears. We planned to go back immediately, but before we could, those hikers found her. In a third room, Vanessa sat fidgeting, her emotions swinging between anger, tears, and even inappropriate laughter. What kind of relationship did you have with your sister? Detective Richards asked Melissa. Vanessa snorted. Oh, she's always been perfect. Always meeting mom and dad's expectations. She graduated college, got a good job, a nice husband, and now a baby. I was jealous. No, Vanessa suddenly shouted. She always gets all the attention, especially now that she's pregnant. Our parents only talk about her. Her voice broke and tears streamed down her face. I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted to scare her. Detective Richards asked incredulously. Scare a pregnant woman by abandoning her in the desert? Didn't you think someone would help her immediately? Vanessa cried out. Melissa always figures things out. I just wanted some time for our parents to finally pay attention to me. At the hospital, tests confirmed there were no lasting injuries to either Melissa or her baby. Greg sat by her side, holding her hand tightly. I've spoken with a lawyer, he said quietly. With the clear evidence, we're certain of charges. You mean sue my family? Melissa's voice trembled with a mixture of anger and sorrow. What they did is a crime, she said firmly. Greg continued. Your life and our baby's life were endangered. A knock sounded at the hospital room door. Detective Parker entered, his tone gentle. How are you feeling? He asked. Much better, Melissa answered softly. My family is all being questioned. Detective Parker sat down. This case is very serious. Assault on a pregnant woman, abandonment. The state prosecutor is very interested. Prison time is possible, though considering there are no prior records and given your family ties, a suspended sentence might be on the table. However, a restraining order will almost certainly be issued. Melissa nodded silently, her heart a turmoil of anger, sadness, and an odd sense of relief, a feeling that maybe finally, the long-buried dysfunction in her family was beginning to be addressed. A week after the incident, preliminary hearings were held. The courtroom was packed with reporters drawn to the high-profile case of a pregnant woman abandoned in the desert. Melissa and Greg entered with their lawyer, while on the opposite side, her parents and Vanessa appeared. None of them looked dignified. All three seemed exhausted and frightened. Vanessa, in particular, had become the target of intense social media backlash, her disheveled hair and dark circles evident. As evidence, the rescuing couple's testimony and video were presented, footage that showed Melissa alone in the desert, watching the car drive off, and even caught Vanessa's voice drifting through the wind. Enjoy a relaxing walk, it's good exercise. The evidence was damning. The video clearly showed the family's car, with its license plate visible, as it sped away, leaving behind a terrified, pregnant Melissa. The police confirmed they had identified the suspects, and news of the incident had exploded across local media. In the courtroom, silence reigned as everyone absorbed the gravity of the case. Then in a trembling voice, Robert attempted to justify himself. It was meant to be a joke, a lesson for Melissa. That's a lie, Vanessa suddenly shouted, her voice echoing. In the packed room. It was all Dad and Mom's plan. I had nothing to do with it. Charlotte's tone turned icy. It was a joke that Melissa was supposed to understand, she insisted flatly. At that moment, the scene faded into a blur of flashing cameras and hushed murmurs as the case continued to unravel, leaving everyone to confront the painful truth of a family shattered by a cruel, misguided attempt at tough love. The sound of footsteps echoed in the courtroom, drawing gasps from the gallery. What shocked everyone most were the messages found on Vanessa's smartphone. 2 weeks before the incident, she'd been texting proposals that made her premeditation clear. This wasn't just a joke, Prosecutor Anderson declared, but a deliberate act driven by jealousy and resentment. Melissa's lawyer Jason stood up. My client was betrayed by her own family and put in mortal danger. The psychological trauma she suffered is immeasurable. While she's on the road to recovery, we ask that her safety, and that of her child, remain our highest priority. Given the seriousness of the case, the judge set bail for the 3 defendants and scheduled the trial. Meanwhile, Robert's real estate company was bombarded with cancellation calls. "We can't do business with someone who doesn't value family," many customers said. Charlotte's social club suspended her membership for violating moral standards. Former friends avoided her, and every invitation was canceled. Vanessa, however, took the worst of it. Her social media accounts were flooded with thousands of condemning comments and tags like "worst sister" and "pregnant woman abuser." Her divorce was dragged into the spotlight when her ex-husband, in an anonymous interview, blamed her self-centered nature for their failed marriage. From afar, while recovering at home, Melissa watched it all unfold. Greg had rearranged his work schedule to be with her as much as possible. "What do you think about all this?" he asked honestly. Melissa gazed out the window before replying, "I have mixed feelings. What they did is unforgivable, but they're still my family, especially my parents. They endangered you and our baby." Placing a gentle hand on her belly, she continued, "That's why I need to be strong. Not tied to old family dynamics but dedicated to protecting our new family." Later that night, Melissa told Greg, "I'm pressing on with the legal charges. Not for revenge, but to protect our child and prevent anyone else from enduring this." Greg hugged her tightly. "You're incredibly strong." Melissa smiled softly. "I have to be, for our child." A year and a half later, a new chapter began. On a sunny afternoon in their garden, Melissa opened her arms as little Emma toddled toward her with a bright smile. Greg sat nearby on a garden chair, watching his wife fondly. "She's strong just like you," he said. "Yes, but her gentle heart comes from you," Melissa replied as she lifted Emma and kissed her soft cheek. After the incident, they left Phoenix behind and moved to a quieter town in Arizona. Melissa now worked at her accounting firm just 3 days a week, devoting the rest of her time to Emma. It was a balanced life. "Are you meeting with Kate today?" Greg asked. "Yeah. Kate, my therapist since the incident, has been helping me heal." Melissa's smile grew warmer. "Lately, I feel less pain when I think of what happened. It took a long time, but I'm finally overcoming the trauma." Back at the Johnson mansion, things were far from rosy. In a cramped office, Robert reviewed documents with a tired expression. Their once vast real estate empire had shrunk to this small space, as most high-end clients had left, either unaware of the scandal or simply not caring. "Thank you," Robert murmured, his hair now completely white and his posture hunched. Charlotte, once the queen of social circles, now dressed plainly with minimal makeup. Her old friends had abandoned her, and new connections were hard to make. A quick online search still brought up articles about the desert pregnant woman abandonment case. "Any word from Vanessa?" Robert asked. "Just her weekly phone call," Charlotte replied softly. "She says she still can't leave her apartment." Vanessa's situation had become the most miserable of all. Unable to recover from the relentless social backlash, she'd sunk into depression. Finding work was nearly impossible. She lived entirely on her parents' support, too frightened to step outside and reliant on deliveries. Despite multiple media interview requests, she refused them all. As expected, the trial ended with Vanessa receiving a suspended sentence, while her parents were ordered to pay substantial damages. A restraining order was issued to keep all three away from Melissa and her family. Later, Charlotte asked quietly, "Melissa's daughter is 10 now, isn't she? Have you ever seen a picture?" Robert shook his head sadly. "We're not allowed to see our granddaughter's face." One day at the supermarket, while Melissa pushed a cart down the vegetable aisle and Emma played with her hair in the child seat, Melissa asked, "Do you like broccoli?" Emma's smile was the only reply needed. Then, turning into the next aisle, Melissa's eyes locked with a familiar figure. It was Vanessa, thin, pale, and stripped of the glamour she once had. For a moment, both women stood frozen. Vanessa's gaze shifted to Emma, and tears welled up. "Melissa," she managed in a trembling voice. After a long silence, Melissa calmly asked, "How are you?" Vanessa stumbled. "Is that your daughter?" Melissa nodded. "Yes, Emma." Vanessa wiped her eyes. "She looks like you." "Not now," Melissa said softly. "I'm taking Emma." She turned and headed down another aisle. For the first time, Melissa felt pity instead of anger toward her sister. That night, when Melissa told Greg about the encounter, he asked, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Melissa replied, gazing at the starry sky through their window. "I stayed calm. Although I'm broken, forgiving isn't the point." Melissa paused, looking toward Emma's bedroom. "We're still prisoners of our past, and that might be our greatest punishment." Taking a deep breath, she continued, "But I have a loving husband and daughter. I found a true family, something they can never take from me." Outside, under a new moon, the stars shone brightly, marking the start of a new lunar cycle. In that moment, Melissa's life had also begun a new cycle. She had grown stronger from her past pain and learned to love family in its truest sense. Meanwhile, far away, her parents and Vanessa spent their days steeped in regret, haunted by the realization of what they had irreparably lost through their cruel actions.